I will say I thought this was pretty hard. How do you take hands-on math and start doing it remote and start doing it virtually? One of the things I noticed, and I think I am on the last slide, so if you could hold on a minute. For some reason, we thought we should be on the last slide, so the first slide. So one of the things as I read the Facebook messages and just read your different tweets was teachers are really concerned about maintaining those relationships with their students, keeping connections, because in their classroom they had lots of sharing, kids were talking, and they needed some sense of normal. They needed to take that classroom atmosphere and environment and put it in a virtual environment. So we're really going to talk about ways to make that happen in this non-threatening, risk-free, safe environment. I'll tell you a little story. My grandson just got on the first day for his Zoom session with his teacher, and I'm doubting whether they're going to do any math at all. He had this huge grin because he's going to talk to his teacher, and it's going to be all the boys talking to the teacher this afternoon. So again, I'm thinking safe environment. If we go on there, so one of the things I kept hearing over again is you want to keep them talking. You want to keep them doing what they were doing in the classroom, and how do we make that happen? So we're going to look at some, if you look at your resources, we're going to look at some conversation starter, some routines that can be very non-math, very non-threatening. So you would teach it in a non-math episode, and then you'd move it to some math to see how it could support you in your lesson, or could be some review and practice. So let's take a look at some of those. So here is one that's very easy. We have this commonly in our household. It's a routine called "What do you notice and what do you wonder?" So as you look at this jar of M&Ms, what do you notice about it and what do you wonder? So just like stick that in the chat, and Dan or Sally will say some of those. So this is what I just talked about that I think everybody wants to see in this virtual world that we have now. And I think we would agree we want to keep them talking in the math, in whatever content area we do. So let's look at a few ways. This was a, what do you notice, what do you wonder about this jar of M&Ms? So just take a few seconds. So this could be a non-math example or a math example. There's no right or wrong answer on this. So what are some things that the people are noticing? Dan or Sally, if you could give that a share out.
It's not full.
It's not full, okay. So this might be Kim's jar of M&Ms after she worked on this.
They're colorful. Where is the lid? It's half empty, it's half full. Your participants, there's 350 people in the room. Everyone is, there's just a stream of comments.
Okay. So again, very safe, right? There's no right or wrong answer. We're looking at just what do they notice and wondering. This is a math example. So I have done a lot of that very non-math. I might put up a nature picture. What do you notice? What do you wonder? I had a picture of the snow coming down yesterday. So this is actually could be a third grade or fourth grade example. So I've moved it into math. What do you notice and wonder now? What are some things they're saying, Dan?
The different shapes form a cross. Some people are wondering about questions related to area and proportions. People are noticing that there's multiple different types of triangles in a lot of the shapes. What fractions of these shapes are what colors? Do all the colors have the same area and size related to color? There's just a ton of questions and comments coming in.
So again, like this is like if I made a slide, but you wouldn't have to do that. If you had a dot camera, if you had your phone set up, you could very easily do something like right on your table, right, and share it with the students. So if you went into this site, there's examples, K2 examples, 3, 5, 6, 8, high school examples of some math examples. But again, make it your own and make it your content that you would want to do. So here's another example. This is from a book by Christopher Danielson, which I don't have out yet, but this is one of his examples. Sally or Dan, shout out some of those answers.
100, 224, 125, 25 dice.
The yellow is different. How many groups of one? 124. Why is there 4 in the middle when everything is 5?
625 dots.
Good question. So again, in his book, How Many, and you could take anything, right? You could do some pairs of shoes and like, it's like, what are we counting? And in this one, it's, are we counting the dice? Are we counting the dots? Are we counting there's 5 yellow, there's you know, a set of green dots, a set of red dice. So you create these pictures that elicit all of these answers. And again, it's a very safe environment. In this case, this could be a non-math or a math, but a lot of you are thinking, I'm going to multiply that 5 times 5, then 5 again. Maybe I take away that 1, but you have just a multitude of answers. So I didn't have the book, but I took this one example, and then I was thinking like what else I could do in my, I had a ton of pens and pencils in my drawer, and I thought I could put that as a picture, right? It would show, do I count the pens? Do I count the pencils? So again, be creative and think about what do you have existing in your household that you could make this happen. So this one is from a site called Which One Doesn't Belong, and you may have seen this already. Students are giving 4 different images. They could be shapes, they could be numbers, they could be, this goes all the way up to high school. There are some other geometry examples. There's some examples with different slopes, different types of lines on this. So you think of which one doesn't belong, and every one of them could not belong based on some reasoning. So again, there's still no one right answer, no one wrong answer to this. The beauty of this is if I'm teaching geometry, I might want to do this. If I'm teaching fractions, maybe this is just going to be a way in. This is my safe environment. This will be the non-math, right? So if you clicked on the site, you would just see some signs. You would just see this whole variety of things you can do. So again, it's this safe, every student, no matter what level. So if you think of that low floor, high ceiling, every student has an entry point for this. So this is a good one. Same but different. I just found this picture. I thought of, you know, what is something the same? What is something that relates to the students? So they're all familiar with dogs, right? I have 2 dogs, but they're different breeds. It's a very non-threatening. So think about what picture right now you would put for your students to look at. Something that's culturally relevant to them, that they have in their neighborhood, they have in their house. What might you put for them that is just very safe? They know right away. So here's a couple examples. Again, we have examples clear from kindergarten through high school. And if you don't find your example, this is such an easy routine that you could just make up your own very quickly. So look at one of those and think about what is same and what is different. So take one of those images and put those answers in the chat. This would be perfect if you were a kindergarten student right now, because they are practicing counting within 20, making 10 ones, making that into 110 in some cases. And then what are all those other ones? So this would be a perfect example. The other one could be a geometry example. So think to yourself, when I think of these math talks, I'm thinking of these warm-ups, these conversation starters. They're things that could take 10 minutes or less as you're doing that math with your students. This is an example for illustrative mathematics. This was day 19, and I think they have some really good examples. This is a grade 1. In this case, they have a set of questions for the 6th grades K through 5. And I also put a link on there that there's some middle school examples. What I liked about this, I thought this one was what could be an in for every 1st grader. But when I looked at some of the pictures, I didn't know if every student would have an in to all of those pictures. So I want you to take this example and think about what would you create, what question would you ask your students, and what standard that would match. So now we're kind of moving from that non-math to math example. This could be a non-math, like what do you notice? All these different kinds of gloves, but then look at the standard that it would match. So Illustrative Mathematics has set up, I think there's like 23 days already. So you can go in there, take a look at those and see what you might use for your class. So I'm going to take a quick stop for a minute. How would you transition these from non-math talks to math talks? What might be something that you could do? And you have to be able to do it either by looking at that, those existing ones, or thinking about something. I call it the 10-minute rule. What could you do very quickly to do a math talk in one of these that we've just discussed? You might think about what you're currently teaching. Dan or Sally, you want to shout some of them out?
Someone saying fractions, the difference between a square and a cube, some geometry stuff. Begin wide angle, go narrow lens, probability. You could do a Padlet reflection digitally for an entire class to engage simultaneously in real time about their thoughts on different photos.
Okay. You might notice that if you were in Carrie Kennedy's section, they had a lot of these examples, these conversation starters, and they put them in their choice board later. So the students had learned what they were, they learned the routine, and now it became part of their math. So that's just one example that I saw. So now we want to look at dot images and quick images, and I'm just going to show you a few. I used to think this was for only elementary students, but one of the things I found is that this can be something that relates clear through high school. And several of the books that I read said, well, these are just some examples. And you might have used some of these, the numbers through 20, the place value, the fractions, or geometry. We're going to look at some. We're not going to look at all of them. And I want you to think about how you could use these in your classroom. So this is something that I would show any student clear through high school. What do you notice? This is give them ample time to notice routine. So if you're a high school teacher, middle school, elementary teacher, what do you notice and how do you notice it?
Patterns, how do you group these dots? 2 groups of 5 patterns, vertical, horizontal.
2, 3, 3, 2, both vertically and horizontally.
So
Flips and turns.
I think I have a PDF in there. If not, I'll put it in there. So what the teacher does, they've made multiple copies of this pattern. So there's 9 on the front, 9 on the back. Students think of all the different ways that they could represent this, right? Think of, would they do some multiplication? As you see right now, they've got some addition, subtraction in it. What would they do to show the total? So you give them time to come up with all these patterns. This could be something that you gave them, right? You gave them as a warm-up. They took it home and they did it. And then the next day you came back and you talked about this. So several books talked about this one pattern, that no matter what grade you start this with your dot image. So I found that pretty interesting, that it's a very safe in. This is a new one that I've seen from Graham Fletchy. So this is geometric subitizing. So what do you notice? So I would probably flip this on for 5 seconds, let them look at it. So I might say something about, how many 4-sided shapes did you see? How many 3-sided shapes do you see? Or what kinds of shapes did you see? How many vertices? What equation would you write for this? So again, this could be a K through 12, depending on how you were going to use it, all right? So there's a whole set of these. These aren't digital, so you could put them on your screen. You could put them on your dot camera if you have one. This is an example of practicing multiplication. So again, it would be what you would see, but a student might say something like this: I see 4 groups of 9 for a total of 36. And before you flash that total up there, you might want to ask them, if they say 4 groups of 9, how they found that total. So this is another example: 4 groups of 7, 28. So I want to think to yourself, so you have all of these cards. You either have the geometric ones, you have these dot cards with multiplication. Besides showing these as a quick image, what else could you do with these cards? So that's the question I'm going to ask you in a second. So be ready for that. This is a game called Splat. And so when I saw this game called Splat, I thought of Part Whole. And we start that in kindergarten, first grade, when we're asking a student to decompose a number. And this goes all the way through high school. If you say 100, break that up into 2 numbers. So a splat, these are irregular patterns. We've been working with some regular patterns. This is a regular pattern. I'm going to show you within 20, but just know he has splat clear going up through fractions, okay? So pay attention to how many dots you see. Then he tells you the total, and then he says splat. So if each of those circles stood for 1, and you know the total, how many are underneath the splat? Let's try another one. Look quickly. How many are underneath the splat? So in this instance, students are practicing their combinations within 20. And then it gets into different colors. So the blue splat might be, the blue circle might be 1, the yellow circle might be 2, they do another splat again. So these are all totally free. So when you look on there, find ones that fit your students. But think they're a little bit harder than the norm, because you have this idea of you're covering up part of it. You don't have a regular pattern, but think of the challenging it could be. So you choose 4 or 5 of these, right? And then you're done for the 10 minutes. So I asked you this question earlier: how could you use any of the dot images that you saw, or some of the ones that I have listed on your resources, or quick images? How can you use that outside of this 10-minute warm-up? And you can include the students on this. Dan, you want to give us some examples?
Yeah, refresh math fact skills, math on the mind, different group talks, assignment extensions, groups or races, maybe for RTIs.
Yeah.
So some of the teachers have made copies of these, right? And they took them home for their fact fluency. Like, well, what I looked about all of these, it's just not coming from me. You're going to see a video of a teacher or the author doing this routine. I would like you especially to pay attention to the place value or base 10 one, because he does a little twist on that where he uses the cards, but then he asks the student another question. So that's a really good different one that you might want to look at. So think of all the games you could do with this. Students could take these home. You might want to ask the students, what if they created their own splat? So that could be the homework or something you assigned to them, and they came back the next day or through that week, and you presented some of those splats. How fun would that be, right? go through 20, go through 100. So you've shown them some different things and let them be creative and share some of their own. So now I want to talk about some different ways we can get the kids talking in different content areas. Again, we're thinking non-threatening. So these could be review and practice. They could be some more learning. They could be supporting a lesson. They could be part of a cool down. They could be part of an exit card. This is an example of close, far, and in between. And I think I must have skipped some of it, but there's two. Let's see if it comes up. That didn't come up. For some reason, I'm clicking the wrong button here. Let me get out of it. Well, you've seen some of the examples and some of the numbers, but let me just give you this one. This starts with the numbers of within 50, within 100, and goes clear through the fractions, goes clear through the negative numbers. So you ask the students which two numbers are closest together and why. Then there is a set of questions already set up for you to ask the students. What is the answer, right? So you don't have to do anything on it. So if I ask you this one, which two numbers are closest and why, what might you say? So I have to justify my answer. I have to do a little bit of problem solving there. What might the students use? Would they use a number line? Would they just think about, what would they think about? These are two. One is called Este Mysteries. One is called Estimation 180. They're really meant for 4th grade and up, but I would think about, I would think about how you could incorporate that for K through 3. So in Este Mysteries, if you look at that, all those clues, it's less than 50, it's a prime odd number, it's a multiple, has 2 digits. One of them even had, so this one might not be too hard for the younger kids, but one of them had something like prime number. So when you go through the Este Mysteries, be sure and think about, is it at my grade level? And if it's not, what could I do to change those clues? So we're not going to do that, but there's like 2 different sets of Este Mysteries. So you have about 100 Este or estimation mysteries for you. I wanted you to look at this Estimation 180, and I'm going to click on it here. So in this Estimation 180, this goes over several days. So I don't know if you've seen it or not. So again, it's very quick. You give them the question, you let them think about it. You come back the next day, you talk about it, then you give them the next clue. So in this case, it's what is Mr. Stendel's height? You have a lower limit, you have an upper limit, and you have to think about, what is your strategy? How did you think about that number? The kids are given an answer, right? But then there's a day 2. And if you looked at that, I'm trying to get that to zoom in for me. Day 2, there's another question on his height. So day 3, there's another question on his height. So maybe day 3, they have to compare it to a child that he has. And then you compare it to 2 other children. So it's pretty interesting. So this one activity, which could be 5 to 10 minutes a day, could go over a 5-day session. So it's a real world estimation situation. It is something that they would see because we talk about height all the time. I got my zoom in and zoom out. It's not letting me, let me get it back. He also has, I'm going to go back to this a minute, but he also has on there, if you look at the resource page, he also has what's called clothesline activities. And so he has the students order these numbers on a clothesline, clear from, this starts in 4th grade and goes all the way up through high school. So what I like about these two, commonly we don't have a lot of math talks for the middle school, high school. Most of these that I've shared with you go all the way through middle school and high school. So I think they'd be very appropriate. So this is called Cube Conversations, and it starts out very easy. You have to think about how many cubes there are, right? So how many cubes do you see? How else can you think about this? Is there even more ways to think about it? So the nice thing about this, you go through some very easy ones. You go through some 2-level ones. They get harder as you go. So this is what you might have the students do. They would share how they thought about that, right? That you wouldn't need to do this. But if you look at, then it gives the total. Here's another example. So I think about if we would have had time to really prepare for the COVID, we might have sent a math toolkit home with our students and thought to ourselves, over the next 2.5 months, they're gonna need this because these are the lessons we're doing. And if we would have had, you know, hopefully we'll be thinking about that as a district. I might have said every student needs 50 cubes. Middle school students, we're gonna do the geometry unit. They need a protractor, they need this, and they need that. And you send those materials home with the students. Because look at the beauty of this. Students actually build it, and they would think about how many they see. So this gets very easy, and it goes to some pretty tough ones to do. So we have shown some that are already created for you. I want you to think about for a few minutes, what if you've looked at this and you've said to yourself, hey, this doesn't fit my lesson today. So I want you to take a moment and think about what are those virtual tools that you might have. And I've given you several examples. How could I use those and do a very quick warm up because it's not written for me, so I need that. So one of the easiest ones that I found is the Math Learning Center. And I wanted to show you an example of this. So they have fractions, geoboards, clacks, number frames, money pieces. I wanted to show you one on place value, and kind of why I liked it here. Totally free. This doesn't have it on all of them. But this does have, if I wanted to create my own number talks, because I don't have this, and I look for some place value ones, I have a button over here where I can share it, and it gives me the opportunity to save that image or copy that image. So I could copy that image and stick it right in my slideshow. I could make a set of base 10 quick images very quickly, all right? If the students had some base 10 pieces, you could make those with them. So what if you said something like, I'm going to get rid of this really quickly. So I'm going to do a pretty simple one. I might ask the student, so this would be a first grade, you know, how many do you see and how do you see it? And then what if I added another 10? How many do I have now and how did you see it, right? So I didn't have this. I forgot to bring my base 10 pieces home. I don't have a dot camera. Look at how quickly you could do this and do it as a warm up, right? And then if the students had their own paper ones they could do that with you. You might say, build 31. And so they build it, you don't show it. You ask them how many 10s and 1s, so you put that up there. So again, these are fast and easy for you to do. This is from the Math Learning Center. I put another one on your site that I just found, that GeoGebra, which has a ton of activities. I think it had 300 elementary activities. I used to think of that as just an middle or high school activity based, but now there's a lot on there.
Kim, can I interrupt you very quickly?
Yep.
Does that site have, we had a couple questions when you were going over that site. Does it have volume equations related to shape, size, volume?
This one doesn't. This
Okay.
one doesn't. I would look on, I will look on the virtual tools, look under the Howard County Public Schools. I would look under grade 4 and 5 virtual tools, but let me look for that also. And if they don't have it, I will put that on there. you're thinking something about volume, they said, Dan?
Yeah, they were just wondering if they liked that, what you showed, and they were wondering if they had similar things with different volume activities. There was another
Okay.
question on, it wasn't just volume, it was also for fractions, but I guess you could probably, is there something there for fractions, or was that just like the base 10 kind of number
They
blocks?
do have one for fractions.
Okay.
There's one for fractions. If you're doing multiplication, they have where you can break that array apart, but they do have one for fractions and that I didn't show. And I think you can do fraction bars, fraction circles, some different area components with fractions. So there is one.
Awesome.
Yes.
So you're going to the next section, and you mentioned the website called GeoGebra. Am I saying that right, Kim?
Yes.
Okay, can you spell that for me very quickly?
GeoGebra. I actually just found that like yesterday, so I haven't been able to explore it because I primarily do elementary, but I noticed on there it had like, as I say, 300 elementary activities, middle school and high school activities. You can create your own activities on there. So I think that is something you can explore. Like, how could you do it as a warm-up, right? As a math, and then how might your students use that? So I think that's a brand new one that I just found. And then look under the virtual tools under the Blackline Masters for Howard County. They have a set of virtual tools there that you could use that they have recommended. So I think those are some pretty good ones. So this is my go-to just because there's only like 10 different ones here, right? Just to get you started, but look how easy you can create a warm-up. So let me go back to our, again, when I think about the toolkit, so what happened is my grandson came home, he's working on Within 20, right? And so I'm scrambling to think about what we can use so he can practice some of that Within 20 because I didn't have my cubes, I didn't have anything at home, right? So these are, you have a set of Blackline Masters and you may already have those in your curriculum. So how could you get those to your students so they could engage with you? So right now I'm having a really tough time because it feels like it's just like one-way conversation, but I don't want that. I want the students to engage with me, build with me somehow. So if they didn't have the actual hands-on tools, if they had that Blackline Master, as you look at this little girl, she's doing this, she's doing something online virtually, but she also has that number line in front of you. So what if you did something with the GeoBoard or did something with money? How could the students engage in that with you? So look at those Blackline Masters. Just because they say K through 5, I think they would fit a lot of the middle school especially, and even some of the high school. So we're gonna try to find some more Blackline Masters just for middle and high school, but I think that's a good place to start. So if you coulda, woulda, what would you have sent home with your students, right? You would have given them a sheet protector, you might have given them a dry erase marker, and you would have given them the PDFs that they could use for the units that you're gonna be doing.
Kim, I want to interrupt because somebody made a really good comment, and I think this is one area that teachers are kind of hesitating in right now, and that is they just said this work excellent for some SPED students.
Very good for SPED students. I think it's good for all of the students. If you've been using any, I'm thinking about how we can make this applicable to any student. You know, if they don't have internet, if they do have internet, if they need to actually like touch it somehow. So if they don't have cubes, what could they use in their house, right? Is there something else that they can count and put into a bundle of 10? Maybe they have straws, maybe they have some popsicle sticks, but what could they do to make that happen? And if they don't have that, how could you get those Blackline Masters into their hands so they could engage with you? So I'm looking at my table right now. If I shared my screen, you would see these cubes and you would see these tiles and you would see my document camera. You would see me actually doing this. But again, it's me doing it. And I don't want that to be just me. So if you had a hands-on approach in your classroom, what are you doing now so that they have something similar when you teach remotely? So we're just gonna kind of keep that one hanging because I think this is that ongoing. I had to really think about it myself. And I tell you what, it took me a long time to get my document camera just so, and I thought to myself, what if I stood up and wanted to put on a poster? Are they gonna see what I wrote? So I think it's a really tough one to think about, not only you doing it, but then how are you gonna engage your students on that one? I just want to very quickly, what I've seen also is all these comments from the parents, like they're pulling their hair out. I saw one parent say, you know, this is how I practice fractions. You know, I got 1/4 a cup of wine. I got a 1/2 a cup. I got 3/4 a cup of wine. So they were really talking about, oh my goodness, how do I do this? So these are some open-ended activities that lots of times are going to take longer than 10 minutes. But what if you gave it to them as part of their work after they talked with you and they came back the next day? And I liked them because they have multiple solutions, maybe multiple strategies, and they can involve the family still at this like engagement level where everybody is still happy. So when you do this, do it with the kids first, right? So they know the routine and then send it home. So I want to share just a few of them. This is from Open Middle. You may have seen this in Carrie Kennedy's. They have activities kindergarten through 12th grade. So instead of giving them this problem, you give them this problem. And they have to come up with 2 different ways. That's a lot of manipulating numbers, and think about all that, well, the thinking and problem solving that's going on. They could use any type of cards, right? Put it on a piece of paper. They have a deck of cards, anything they want to make it happen. That's a pretty easy, they can come up with that tool at home.
Kim, we've got about 9 minutes left.
Okay, this is the decimal example, the same kind of activity. So again, do this in your warm-up, in your 10 minutes, right? Safe environment, then send it home. This is an example. If you're doing investigations, I found this example. Kids get to choose their numbers, right? And then how do they solve it? This is called a parallel problem. So whether you're doing 2 digits or 3 digits, students can build it, look at all the different solutions they could have. This is another example from the 5th grade. So I'm telling you, look for examples from your existing curriculum. If you don't have those, how could you change some things up so you could do that? Look at all the math that's going on. These are some examples of money. 31 cents, dimes and pennies, what could I have? This was from, this was in Carrie Kennedy's, and I'm gonna share this again because let's pretend you have already done these activities, the kids have done them. She has now put these in the choice board. So they're non-threatening. They were ones you talked about. Now they become part of the math. She's got a would you rather. She's got some, which one doesn't belong, right? But the kids have already practiced these. So I'll make sure that you have these slides. You can see these links because she's got K2 choice boards, 6-8. And if you're middle or high school teacher, if you look clear up at the top of the conversation starters, somebody has done warm-ups for the entire year. So you might want to look at those. So very quickly, we have shared a lot, and I want to go back to at the beginning because everything that we've done today, whether it's been math or non-math, these are some of the things the researchers have said that they see over and over again in student work. The relationships between numbers and patterns, and think about how much you did. The connections that they've made with each other, with the math content and ideas. You've got them to share and to justify. You have asked them to communicate and collaborate in some manner. So we haven't talked about how they share that with you. I'm sure you've talked about that in other ones. But most importantly, I hope you take this back and think about how you're going to keep them talking when you have this virtual environment now. because as I see, this has been the number one, these two things that I have noticed with teachers is those relationships, right? 2.5 months at home. And can I still make those connections with the kids? And I think you can through math in some non-threatening ways, and then you integrate them into math. So if you have any questions, anything that you want added onto that resource sheet, be sure and put it on the chat with Dan and Sally. Any questions, Dan or Sally, that we didn't answer? Make them up.
There were a few. I don't, my plan from the get-go was just dump them into a document and have you share on your resource page, Kim. But if someone has a question right now, we can certainly field it. We have about 6 minutes remaining of this section. There's just a constant stream of comments that people are saying, Kim, that are really appreciate the session. That's very valuable. Someone just asked a question about CEUs. Let me post that link in there.
Something else I was going to add, there were some comments written about, using manipulatives and such with, when people don't have the technology or other options. And I think a lot of people are on Facebook today, and I watch Facebook Live as an option for teaching with some of these manipulatives and videoing yourself. And it's an easy way. I see a lot of my teacher friends on there, putting those on there for their kids.
Kim, someone also asked if you would do any, so this little session that you just ran, would you be able to expand on it and offer teachers some more support in different areas? They were wondering if there was a longer session that you might be able to do later on.
We didn't even get into number talks, right? How we do that. I left out that whole section. So that's in some of the Howard County routines. So I really wanted to hone in on what are some things you might not have seen, but oh yeah, most definitely, that would be good. And I think, I just hit the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure if I ask any of the teachers, you would come up with, we would have another resource page, right? So I wanted to keep it smaller so you don't have all this. One of the things that I read at the very beginning was you were getting a ton of information. You may already have this, so you're going to decide, am I going to use it to tweak it, right? Or I want to use it fully? Am I going to stick this in this bucket that I'm not going to use right now, but I'll think about it later because I already have enough? So decide where you're going to put this information, but I hope you've come away with something that you can add to what you're currently doing now. And if not, stick it in the bucket for next year. That's certainly all right. But yes, we could do another session. I think we're going to plan on more virtual sessions if people like it.
Kim, you're working with math, and I do a lot of reading, and my discussion session kind of it talks about some of the same things. It's those two, math and reading, are such important pieces to have explicitly and hands-on, that it's important that we not lose that part as we move to the virtual platform.
Right. And I keep hearing that there's no way I'm going to finish the curriculum and people come back and say it's the relationships and the connections. And I can tell you my grandson will do no math today. His smile was a mile wide because he gets to talk to his teacher. So if you get into your session and the kids need to talk about something that has nothing to do with math, then you talk about something that has nothing to do with math, right? So if you can move it to the math, that's great. But if not, I think this is like the big deal. So yeah, but definitely we can do another virtual. I think that would be fun. Okay. And I'll
Awesome.
get my